I'm Audra Linden, 47, and I spent 26 years in the United States Army, quietly becoming a general my own family never once believed I could be. For 2 decades, I gave the service everything: the holidays, the long absences, the work nobody back home could see, and they called it an office job. But when a young aide took me by the elbow and walked me out of my own promotion ceremony, and the general at the podium opened the orders and read my name, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been underestimated by the very people you gave the most to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being dismissed, hit that like button and subscribe. It was the summer of 1988, and the most important room in the world was my father's kitchen. I was 10 years old, and I had learned by then that the kitchen table was where things got decided. Not just what we ate or when we left for church, but bigger things. Who had done well that week? Whose work counted? My father sat at the head of that table the way some men sit on a throne, and he handed out his approval like he was paying out of his own pocket. My father's name was Russell, and he was a foreman at a tooling plant for 31 years. He believed with his whole chest that real work was something you could hold in your 2 hands at the end of a shift. A finished part, a poured foundation. A thing that existed because you had bent your back over it. By that measure, I was a strange child because the things I loved could not be held. I loved maps. I loved the atlas we kept on the bottom shelf, the one with the cracked spine. I loved knowing how a thing got from one place to another, what roads it took, what had to happen first so the next thing could happen at all. I remember the night he looked at the map I had drawn of our whole town, every street, the water tower, the route the school bus took, and he turned it over in his hands like he was checking it for weight. Then he set it down. "Bridget builds things people can see," he said. He meant my sister, 2 years older, who had won a ribbon that week for a birdhouse. You move paper from one pile to another. He did not say it to be cruel. That is the part I have spent 40 years trying to explain to people. He said it the way you state the weather, and my sister, who was sitting right there, learned the lesson faster than I did. She learned that there were 2 kinds of children in our house, the kind who made things and the kind who shuffled paper, and that it was safer, always, to be the first kind out loud. My mother, Eileen, did not say anything. She almost never did, not at that table. She would clear the plates and run the water and let my father decide who we were. I did not blame her for it then. I have had to learn how not to blame her for it since. I want to tell you that I rebelled, that I stood up at 10 years old and announced that maps were a kind of work too, that moving the right thing to the right place at the right time was the oldest and most important work there was, older than the birdhouse, older than the plant. I did not. I folded my map into a small square and put it in my pocket and decided, quietly, that I had been born loving the wrong kind of important. So I went looking for a place where my kind counted. I found it the way a lot of us find it, half by accident. There was a recruiter who came to my high school in an Army ROTC scholarship that would pay for the college my family could not, and a brochure with a photograph of a young officer standing in front of a wall of charts, pointing at something, clearly in charge of something. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Nobody in my house had ever pointed at a chart and had people listen. I applied that night. The day I commissioned in the spring of 2000, I was 22 years old. My mother came. My father said he had work, and maybe he did. My sister sent a card that arrived 3 days late with a check for $20 in it, which was, I understood, a kindness in the only language she had. The thing I remember is the salute. A sergeant first class, a man twice my age with 3 rows of ribbons and a face like a closed door, snapped to attention in front of my brand new gold bar and held a salute until I returned it. He did not know me. He did not know about the kitchen table or the map in my pocket or the birdhouse ribbon. He saluted the bar, and the bar meant I had earned a place in a system that would, from that day forward, tell me exactly what I was worth and exactly what was expected of me, in writing, in advance, the same as everyone else. I drove home that night with the windows down, and I realized I had been waiting my entire life to be looked at like that. Not adored, not even liked, just counted. Just seen as a person whose work was real. I was good at the work. I want to be plain about that, because the rest of the story does not make sense unless you understand that I was very good at the thing my family could never see. The Army calls it sustainment and operations and a dozen drier words, but what it comes down to is this. Armies do not run on courage. They run on the boring miracle of the right thing arriving at the right place at the right hour. The fuel, the water, the blood for the field hospital, the part for the broken engine. Someone has to know how all of it moves, and someone has to be responsible when it does not. And that someone, for most of my adult life, was me. By 2004, I was a captain, 26 years old, commanding a company. By 2008, I was overseas for the first time, learning that the work I did in the dark, on a laptop, on a flight line at 2 a.m, was the difference between men getting home and men not. None of it photographed well. None of it made a birdhouse. All of it mattered more than anything I had ever touched. Let me give you one example, because I think the invisible kind of work only becomes real to people when they can see one piece of it. On that first deployment, there was a forward position, a small one, cut off by a washed-out road, and weather that grounded the helicopters for 9 days. The men out there were running low on water in a place where running low on water is not an inconvenience, it is a countdown. Nobody back home would ever read a headline about it. There was no battle. There was just a problem, and the problem was mine. And for 3 days, I did not really sleep, because I was working a route through terrain that did not want to be worked, calling in favors from a logistics network that spanned 4 countries, finding a different vehicle, a different driver, a different bridge that would hold. On the morning of the 4th day, a convoy I had built out of nothing rolled into that position with water and fuel and the part for their generator. I never saw it. I was 1,000 miles away, looking at a screen. But 40 men drank that day because of a plan, because of paper, because of the kind of work my father said was not work. I have never built a birdhouse. I have kept men alive with a spreadsheet and a telephone and a refusal to quit. And I will put that against any object you can hold in your 2 hands. I called home that first deployment on a holiday because I wanted to tell someone about it. My sister answered. I could hear the family behind her, the clatter of a meal I was not at. We're fine without you, Bridget said. Not angry, just informational. Don't worry about us. And she hung up first, the way she always hung up first, so that the silence afterward belonged to her and not to me. I stood on a flight line on the other side of the world, holding a phone that had already gone quiet, the engines roaring somewhere out in the dark, and I made the deal I would keep for almost 20 years without ever saying it out loud. If they would not see the work, then the work itself would have to be enough. I would pour my whole life into something invisible, and I would not ask the kitchen table to clap. For a very long time, that deal held. The trouble with a deal like that, the thing nobody tells you, is that an empty seat does not stay empty. It keeps pulling at you. You keep performing for it. You keep waiting, in some buried, stubborn corner of yourself, for the day the people who decided who you were will finally look up and decide again. I would wait 18 more years for that day. When it finally came, it did not look anything like I had pictured. It started with a stranger's hand on my elbow, steering me toward a door. The years after that first deployment have a way of blurring together because they were all the same shape. I rose. The family story about me hardened. Those 2 things happened in parallel, year after year, and for a long time, I told myself they had nothing to do with each other. By 2011, I was a major, 33 years old, and I had been pulled onto a joint track, which is the Army's word for work that crosses between services and between countries. It meant more responsibility and more time away. It also meant my work got harder to explain at a dinner table, because now it did not even fit inside one branch, let alone one sentence. My sister had built a real life by then, and I do not say that with a sneer. Bridget had a good marriage, a house she was proud of, a small business that did well, 2 children she raised with genuine care. She had stayed. That word stayed became the whole architecture of how she saw herself and how she saw me. She had stayed and I had left. She was present and I was absent. And because the family needed a way to explain why one daughter was never at the table, Bridget supplied it, and the explanation was always the same. The Army was something I had chosen over them. The uniform was a way of being important somewhere else, so I would not have to be ordinary here. I came home on leave around 2013, and I watched my sister introduce me to a room full of her friends. I was 35 years old, and I had just spent a year keeping a supply line alive across 2 countries. This is my sister, she said. She does something with the Army. An office job, I think. Don't get her started. It's all acronyms, and nobody can follow it anyway. The room laughed kindly and moved on, and I let it stand. That is the part I have to own. I let it stand. I had become so practiced at shrinking myself in that house that I did it now on reflex, folding myself into a small square the way I had folded that map, putting myself in my own pocket so nobody would have to be uncomfortable. Then in 2016, my father died. I was mid-rotation when the call came, in a role I genuinely could not walk away from inside of a day. The kind of role where if you simply leave, things that are holding break and people who are depending on those things get hurt. I have signed orders in my life that moved thousands of human beings across oceans. I want you to sit with the bitterness of this. The one movement I could not execute in time was the one that would have put me at my own father's graveside on the right morning. I moved heaven and earth. I called in favors I had been saving for a decade, and I still landed one day after they put him in the ground. My sister never forgave it. I'm not sure I have ever fully forgiven it either, if I'm honest, but Bridget made it into something permanent. At the reception after, in the kitchen of all places, near that same table, she said the things she would say, in one form or another, for the next 10 years. You weren't here, she said. You're never here. Don't you dare stand in this kitchen and pretend the Army ever cost you anything that mattered. It didn't cost you. It was the excuse. It was always the excuse. I did not defend myself. I want you to notice that I keep telling you that, because it took me a long time to understand that not defending yourself is not the same thing as dignity. Sometimes it is just an old wound doing what old wounds do. I stood there and absorbed it, and some part of me agreed with her, the 10-year-old part, the part that had decided long ago that my kind of work was not real and therefore could be sacrificed without real cost. There was one person in my life who never bought any of it. Her name is Tessa Quinn, and we met as lieutenants, 2 women in a system that did not have many of us yet, and she has been the truest mirror I have. In 2021, I called her to tell her I had made colonel and that I was taking a posting in Europe as the senior American officer at a multinational headquarters. I expected her to be happy for me. She was, but Tessa has never been able to let me hide inside good news. That's the work, she said. I'm proud of the work, but Audra, can I say the other thing? You're going to anyway. You keep waiting for them to clap, she said. Your family, you keep doing all of this partly for a room that is never going to stand up. They are not going to clap, not because you haven't earned it, because they decided who you were when you were 10, and they are comfortable there. You have to stop performing for an empty seat. It's killing something in you, and you can't even feel it anymore. I told her she was being dramatic. I closed the laptop, and then I sat in my quarters and looked at the suitcase, already packed by the door, the next posting, the next absence, and I felt that empty seat pull at me exactly the way she said it would, and I hated that she was right. I took the posting. I was good at it, the way I had always been good. For 4 years, I ran a piece of work that most of the people I love will never understand. And I told myself, again, that the work was enough. And in some real way it was. But the seat kept pulling, and somewhere in those 4 years, without admitting it to anyone, I started to want, just once, before I was done, to be seen by them, not told, shown. I was so tired of explaining myself into a polite, glazed nothing. I wanted, for one day, to walk into a room and let the room say it for me. I should have known better than to want that. Wanting to be seen by people who have decided not to look is the oldest trap there is. But in the spring of 2025, a board met and a list came out, and my name was on it, and the trap and the gift arrived in the very same envelope. The list said that I had been selected for promotion to Brigadier General. 1 star, the first rank where they stop calling you by your job and start calling you by your weight. I told almost no one outside the people who had to know. And then I did a thing I had never done in my life. I decided I was going to bring my family. The ceremony would be held back in the States at the installation where I would take up my new responsibilities in a place called Memorial Hall, a wood-paneled room with a stage and rows of chairs and the flags standing along the back. The date was set for a Friday morning in June of 2026. I would fly home the night before, off an overnight flight, and pin the star the next day. I called my mother first. I told her there was an event at my work, something I would like her to come to on that Friday at 1000 hours at Memorial Hall. I gave her the address. I did not say it was mine. I called my sister next and I said the same thing, almost word for word. An event at work. I would love it if you came. Friday, 10 in the morning. What kind of event? Bridget asked. Just come, I said. Please. It would mean a lot. There was a pause, and then she said she would see, which is what my sister says, instead of yes, and then she said she would come, which surprised me. I want to explain why I did it that way, because for months afterward, people who love me asked why I would set myself up like that, why I would not simply tell them, here is my promotion, come watch your daughter, your sister, become a general. The answer is that I had told them. For 20 years I had told them what I did, in plain words, and I had watched the words land in that polite glazed nothing, the dinner party nothing, the office job I think nothing. I did not have any more words. I was out of them. So I thought, this one time, I will not tell you. I will let you walk into a room where 1,000 details I built my whole life. Learning how to control will all line up and say the thing for me. Let the flags say it. Let the orders say it. Let the whole room stand up and say it so I do not have to. It was, I can see now, a kind of test. And the thing about setting a test for people who have always failed you is that some buried part of you is hoping this time against all the evidence that they will finally pass. I landed at 6 in the morning the day of the ceremony, off a flight that had crossed an ocean and most of a continent. I had not really slept. I picked up my own garment bag off the carousel, the dress uniform pressed inside it, and I changed at the airport, in a restroom, the way you do when your life is mostly motion. By the time I drove onto the installation and parked outside Memorial Hall, it was 9:45, and I was running on coffee and adrenaline and that particular hollow clarity you get when you have been awake too long. Here is the thing I did not think about, because I had spent 4 years on the other side of the world. At this command, on this installation, in this hall, almost no one knew my face. I had never been stationed here. To the young officers setting up chairs and the protocol staff fussing over the program, I was not Colonel Linden, the incoming general. I was an unfamiliar woman in service dress, jet-lagged, walking in alone, a little lost-looking, 20 minutes before a ceremony was supposed to start. I came through the doors, and I saw my mother right away, near the front, in a blue dress I recognized from 100 holidays. My sister sat beside her, scrolling on her phone, dressed beautifully, looking like she was waiting to be impressed and doubting she would be. The sight of them in those chairs did something to my chest that I had not expected. I started toward them. The presiding officer that morning was a lieutenant general named Theodore Hale, a 3-star, and he was still behind a closed door at the side of the stage with the protocol team, running late, the way the most senior person in any building is always running a little late, which meant the floor was being run by his aide de camp. His name, I would learn, was Captain Devin Cross. He was 29 years old. He was sharp and pressed and visibly anxious to keep the room perfect for his general, and he was scanning the hall the way a good aide scans a room, looking for anything out of place. And what he saw, near the reserved front section, 3 minutes before his general was due to walk out, was a woman he did not recognize, standing where the official party was supposed to stand. He moved fast and smooth and certain. He stepped directly into my path, put on the polite, firm voice they teach you for exactly this, and reached out and took my elbow. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said. "This section's closed for the official party. Let me walk you out. We'll get you seated and back. I want to tell you what 20 years does to a person. A younger version of me, the one with the brand new gold bar, might have laughed or shown him my identification, or simply said, 'Son, you might want to check the program.' But that is not the reflex 20 years had built in me. The reflex 20 years had built in me was to be walked quietly toward the back of the room by someone who was sure. I had been doing it since I was 10, so I did it now. I let him turn me. I let his hand stay on my elbow. I started to walk where he steered me. He was not cruel. That was almost the worst of it. There was nothing in his face but a young man doing his job well, certain he had caught a problem before it became one. And I had spent my whole life being a problem that certain people caught and quietly removed. My sister looked up then. She saw me, her sister, apparently being escorted out of a room by a young officer, and I watched her face do the thing it had always done. She did not stand. She did not say, "That is my sister. Take your hand off her." She looked away, fast, the way you look away from someone else's embarrassing scene, and she said something low to our mother, and I read it on her lips more than heard it. "Mom, sit down. Don't make it a thing. She'll be fine." My mother half rose anyway, confused, one hand on the back of the chair in front of her, not understanding what she was seeing, but understanding that it was wrong. And the captain kept walking me up the aisle toward the doors, gentle and certain, and I kept letting him, all the way to the moment the side door opened and Lieutenant General Hale walked out onto that stage, crossed to the podium, and opened a leather folder that held a single sheet of paper. He looked down at it. He began to read, in the flat, formal cadence they use for orders, the words that make a thing official in the eyes of the entire United States government. "The President of the United States," he read, "has placed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, and abilities of Colonel Audra Linden. My name." He read my name into a microphone, into a full room, and then he looked up from the page to find the officer he had just named being escorted toward the exit by his own aide. The room had gone very still. Hale's eyes moved from me to Captain Cross and back, and when he spoke again, it was not into the formal cadence. It was quiet, and it carried to every corner of that hall. "Captain," he said, "that's the officer we're promoting." For one long second, nobody moved at all. Then 100 chairs scraped the floor at once, the whole room getting to its feet, and the young captain's hand fell away from my elbow as if my arm had turned to fire. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice had nothing left in it. "Ma'am, I did not answer him. I was looking at the room. The whole room was standing, and I understood, standing there in the center aisle with everyone on their feet around me, that I had finally done the thing I came to do. I had let the room say it for me. I just had not understood, until that exact moment, that it would have to walk me to the door first. Lieutenant General Hale came down off the stage. A 3-star does not usually come down off the stage. The principal comes up to him. He came down anyway, and he crossed the room, and the standing crowd parted, and he stopped in front of me, and he did the thing the captain had not. He came to attention, and he saluted me, a colonel, which a 3-star is not required to do, and he held it. "General Linden," he said, "I've read your file. It is an honor to do this. Will you come up?" I went up. They walked me to the front of the room where I should have been standing all along, and the ceremony found its rhythm. And the strangest part of all of it was how ordinary the next 10 minutes were. The orders, the oath, the pinning. They called my mother up to help pin the star. I had arranged that weeks before, a line item in a program she did not know was mine. Eileen came up the steps slowly, in her holiday blue, and her hands were shaking so badly that the aide, that same Captain Cross, stepped in quietly and steadied the star against my shoulder board so she could press the pin through. The two of them, my mother and the young man who had tried to remove me, fastening one silver star to my uniform together. I have thought about that a great deal since. There was something in it I did not have a word for yet. The word, I think now, is grace. Two people who had each in their own way failed to see me, standing on either side of my shoulder and pinning the proof of who I was to the cloth, with their own hands, at the same moment. Nobody planned it. The Army does not script a thing like that. It simply happened, and it was the truest part of the whole morning, and I almost missed it, because I was so braced for the next dismissal that I had forgotten people are capable of becoming, very suddenly, better than they were a minute before. And then Hale read the citation, the real one, the part that named the work. He read about a multinational command. He read about a sustainment operation in which a relief corridor was held open across a continent for a humanitarian effort. 40,000 people fed and moved and kept alive, and the dry sentence that this had been planned and run and answered for, by the officer now being promoted. He read the invisible thing out loud into a microphone, onto the record, in front of my mother and my sister, and a room full of officers who understood exactly what those dry words cost. "Some officers," Hale said, looking up from the page, "are famous in the hallway. This one is famous in the after-action reports. That is the only place fame has ever actually mattered." I stood there and let the words land, and for the first time in my life, the polite, glazed nothing did not come. The room knew what it was hearing. My sister, in the third row, was not scrolling on her phone anymore. Afterward, in the receiving line and the milling around, the captain found me. I watched him work up the nerve to do it, which took real courage, because he plainly expected me to end him. He came to attention in front of me with the stiffness of a man at his own execution. "General," he said, "I have no excuse." I escorted the principal out of her own ceremony. "Whatever the consequences, I'll accept it. I won't make you ask twice." I looked at this young man, 29 years old, certain and sharp and now devastated, and what I felt, more than anything, was recognition. Not of him, of the situation. I had spent my entire career being the person nobody in the room recognized, the one whose work did not show on the surface, the one a confident young officer could look right past. I knew the inside of that mistake from the other side. "Captain," I said, "look at me. You saw a person you didn't recognize, and you tried to do your job, and you were certain. I have been the person nobody recognized in every room I have ever walked into. I know exactly how that mistake gets made because the whole system is built to make it. We are going to talk, you and I, but the conversation is going to be about how you make sure this never happens to the next invisible person who walks through a door. It is not going to be about whether you're finished. You are not finished. Do you understand me?" He did not entirely understand me, but he nodded, and something in his face came back online, and I filed him away as a problem I intended to solve rather than punish. Tessa found me by the windows a few minutes later. She had flown in as my guest, and she had watched the whole thing, the escort and the orders, and the room standing up, and she had a look on her face that was half fury and half something gentler. "I almost stood up and decked that kid," she said. "Don't," I said. "He's mine now." She laughed, and then she stopped laughing, and she looked at me the way she has looked at me since we were lieutenants, the way that does not let me hide. "You know the room standing up was never the point," she said. "Right? You set this whole thing up so they'd finally see it. And they did. But Audra, the room rising was never going to be the thing that healed you. The thing that heals you is you, finally not sitting down. You didn't argue with that kid. 20 years ago, that would have been you swallowing it. But today, when the orders got read, you didn't fold yourself into a pocket. You stood in the middle of that aisle and you let it be true. That's the part that counts. Not them standing, you stopping. I did not have an answer for that. I had a citation in my hand on heavy paper with my name on it, and I read it again while she watched, and I felt the strangest grief, the specific grief of recognition that arrives 20 years late, after you have already learned to live without it. It is a real thing, that grief. Nobody warns you that being finally seen can hurt, that it can open the very wound you closed in order to survive. But underneath the grief was something steadier, and I sat with it by that window until I could name it. What I wanted from my family, I realized, was not actually an apology. I had stopped needing the apology somewhere over the ocean years ago. What I wanted was the truth, said once, out loud, by the people who had spent 2 decades saying the opposite. I wanted it on the record the way the citation was on the record. And I realized standing there, a brand new general, that I was finally going to ask for it. That evening I drove to my mother's house, where I knew my sister would be, because some conversations you do not schedule. You just stop avoiding them. I did not come in hot. I want to be clear about that, because the version of this where I storm in and unload 20 years of grievance is a satisfying story, and it is not what happened, and it is not who I want to be. I came in quiet, but I came in unwilling, for the first time in my life, to pretend the day had not happened. My sister was at the kitchen table, the same kind of table. They are always the same table. "Big day," Bridget said, and there was an edge under it. The old edge, the one that says do not get above yourself. "It was," I said. "I'd like to talk about it. The whole thing, including the part where I got walked toward the door and you looked away." The edge came all the way up then. Bridget put down her coffee. "What was I supposed to do? Make a scene? I didn't know what was happening. None of us knew what was happening because you didn't tell us. You never tell us anything. You just show up and expect us to read your mind." "You're right that I didn't tell you," I said. "I'll own that. I set it up that way, and it was a mistake, and I'm sorry for it." "But Bridget, you didn't look away because you were confused. You looked away because some part of you has always been ready to believe I'm the problem in the room. You've been ready for 20 years. And then she reached for the weapon. She always reaches for the same weapon. You want a medal for being underestimated? You were gone when Dad died. You weren't here. You were never here. Once, that sentence would have ended me. I would have absorbed it and agreed with it in the 10-year-old part of my chest and let her win, because the 10-year-old believed her. I did not let her win this time. I was holding a relief corridor open for 40,000 people the week our father died, I said evenly, without raising my voice. I have signed orders that moved entire populations out of harm's way. The one movement I could not make in time was getting to that grave on the right morning, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. You don't have to forgive it, but I am done, Bridget. I am completely done letting you use the worst day of my life to erase every other day of it. The kitchen went silent. And into that silence, my mother spoke. I almost did not recognize her voice, because she was using it for something she had never used it for in that house. She was using it to defend me. I have a drawer, Eileen said. Upstairs. It's full of you, Audra. Every notice, every promotion, every clipping from the base paper that anyone ever sent me. 20 years of you in a drawer where nobody could see it, including you. She stood up and she went to a cabinet and she pulled open a drawer I had never thought to open, and it was full, actually full of yellowed paper. I should have put these on the wall, she said, and her voice broke. Every one of them. I let your father decide what counted in this family. And then when he was gone, I let your sister decide. And I never once, not one single time, decided for myself. That was mine to do, and I didn't do it, and I am so sorry. Not for him, for me, for being quiet for 40 years. Bridget stared at the drawer. Whatever she had been about to say, she did not say it. You cannot argue with a drawer full of 2 decades of evidence and a mother who has finally decided to stop being quiet. The story she had built her whole standing on, the absent sister, the selfish one, the one who chose the uniform over the family, cracked right down the middle in front of her, and there was nothing underneath it to stand on. She did not apologize that night. I want to be honest about that, because the clean apology is another satisfying story that did not happen. But the architecture came down, and sometimes that is the thing that has to happen first, before anything real can get built. The weeks after a thing like that do not resolve neatly. Real life is not a ceremony. There is no music cue when a family story breaks. There is just the slow, awkward work of everyone figuring out who they are, now that the old script has stopped running. My sister had the harder version of that work, and I found to my own surprise that I had compassion for it. For 20 years, Bridget had defined herself as the one who stayed, and a definition like that only works if there is someone to be better than. I had been that someone. I was the absent sister so that she could be the present one. I was the selfish one so that she could be the devoted one. When the room stood up and the citation was read, and our mother opened that drawer, Bridget did not just lose an argument. She lost the other half of her own identity. She had to sit, alone, in a quiet house, and ask herself who she was if she was not the good daughter, standing in contrast to the bad one. That is a brutal question to face at 50. I did not envy her it. I heard secondhand, the way you always hear these things, that the weeks were hard on her. A cousin mentioned that Bridget had been quiet at a family lunch, that she had not held court the way she usually did. Another relative told me, not unkindly, that my sister had said something at that lunch that nobody quite knew what to do with. She had said, apparently, into a lull, that she had spent a long time being sure about her sister, and she was no longer sure about anything. Then she had changed the subject. For Bridget, who had never once in my memory admitted to being wrong about a single thing, that small public uncertainty was an earthquake. I did not gloat when I heard it. I had spent too many years on the receiving end of certainty to take any pleasure in watching someone lose theirs. If anything, I felt the first thin thread of something I had not felt toward my sister in 20 years, which was tenderness. She was lost. I knew exactly what lost felt like. I had practically lived there. I had my own version of the work, and it was not what I expected either. I had spent my whole life wanting the star. I had told myself the star was the proof, the visible thing, the birdhouse my father could finally hold. And then I pinned it on, and I discovered the joke that I think every honest senior officer eventually discovers. The star does not point at you. It points away from you. Everything about the rank is responsibility for other people. The higher you go, the less it is about being seen, and the more it is about seeing. About being the one in the room whose whole job is to notice the people everyone else walks past. The supply that is about to run short, the unit that is quietly breaking, the young soldier nobody's looking at, who's about to be the reason something goes right or goes wrong. I had wanted the star so that I would finally be visible. The cruel and beautiful joke of it is that the star is a pair of eyes, not a spotlight. All it does is make you responsible for noticing everyone the room walks past. I had spent my life being the unseen person. Now my entire job was to make sure the unseen person got seen. I cannot tell you how strange and right that felt, which is exactly why I did the thing I did about Captain Cross. Lieutenant General Hale's executive officer was a major named Naomi Frost, a careful, loyal officer whose job was to protect her general from embarrassment, and in her view, Captain Cross had handed her general a very large embarrassment. About 2 weeks after the ceremony, she asked me for a word, and she came to it directly, the way good staff officers do. "General, the Aide," Frost said. "Captain Cross, I want to be candid. We can make this quietly go away. A reassignment, a quiet note in the file, and he moves on somewhere he won't be a reminder. Frankly, ma'am, it'd be cleaner for everyone, including you, if he just disappeared from the picture." I understood the offer. It was a kindness to me in her mind. The man who walked the new general out of her own promotion, gone, erased, no longer a thing anyone had to look at. And I sat with how badly I wanted to refuse it. And I made sure my reasons were the right ones before I answered. "Major," I said, "we are not going to disappear a young officer for failing to recognize a face the entire system trained him not to look at twice. Do you understand what I'm saying? He made the exact mistake the institution makes every single day to people who don't have a general waiting to read their orders. He just made it out loud, in front of everyone, to someone who happened to have orders that day. If we erase him, we learn nothing, and he learns the wrong thing, which is that the lesson was about protecting the powerful instead of seeing the overlooked. Give him to me. I'll take him on. That's not a request I'm making as a favor. That's the right answer, and I'm fairly sure you already know it." Frost looked at me for a moment, and then something in her relaxed, and she said, "Yes, ma'am. I think I did know it. I just needed to hear someone say it." And Captain Devon Cross became, by my own choosing, my problem to fix. That same week, my mother called me. Her voice was different than it had been my whole life. Lighter, younger, almost. "I hung one up," she said. "Hung what up?" "On the wall, in the hallway. The first clipping, the one from when you made captain, the little one from the base paper. I put it in a frame, and I hung it in the hallway where everyone who comes in this house is going to see it." She paused. "It's a little crooked. I'm leaving it crooked. 40 years late, it can be crooked." I stood in my quarters with the phone against my ear, and I did not trust myself to speak for a second. A crooked frame in a hallway. After everything, that was the thing that nearly took my legs out from under me. Not the star, the crooked frame. Trust, the real kind, does not arrive. It gets built, slowly, by hand, the same way everything I have ever cared about gets built. And in the months that followed, I watched it get built on 2 fronts at once. And neither one was fast, and both of them were real. The first was Captain Cross. I meant what I told Major Frost, so I made the time, more time than a new general technically has, and I taught that young man the thing my whole career had taught me. We would go over an event, a ceremony, a visit, a movement, and I would make him find the person nobody was watching. The spouse, standing alone at the edge of the room. The junior enlisted soldier holding the door. The contractor in civilian clothes who turned out to be the one who actually knew how the building worked. "Your job," I told him one afternoon, "is not to protect the front row from strangers. Anybody can guard a velvet rope. Your job is to assume the stranger might be the entire reason the room exists. The person you don't recognize is not a threat to be managed. Sometimes she's the principal. More often, she's just a human being the room is about to overlook, and your job, the real one, is to make sure the room doesn't. Look twice. Every time. At everyone. Especially the ones it's easy not to see." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he meant it in a way that went all the way down. "I'll never not look twice again." And he didn't. I watched him change, week over week, from a sharp young officer who guarded the rope into one who watched the room. It is the best work I have done as a general, and it did not show up in a single after-action report. The second front was my sister, and it moved slower because 20 years does not turn around in a season. But about 2 months after the ceremony, Bridget called me, not for a holiday, not for a reason. She called me, and after some throat clearing, she asked me a question she had never once asked in our entire adult lives. "I realized something," she said, "when they read that citation. I don't actually know what you do. I've spent years telling people you do office work, and I don't even know if that's true. So I'm asking. Will you tell me? For real? What do you do? I'll listen this time. I promise I'll actually listen." The question itself was the olive branch. I knew that. For Bridget, asking that question, admitting she did not know, admitting that the things she had said about me for 2 decades was something she had made up. That was as close to an apology as her pride could get for now, and it cost her enormously, and I was not going to make her pay more for it than it already cost. "I'll tell you," I said. "I'll tell you all of it. But Bridget, I need one thing on the table first, and then I'll never bring it up again." "Okay. I'm not going to be shrunk anymore," I said. "Not introduced as some office job. Not used as the family cautionary tale, the one who chose the army over us. If you want to know who I am, I will tell you everything, gladly, for as long as you want to listen. But the old version is over. That's the floor. Can you live on that floor with me?" There was a long pause on the line, and then my sister, who has never in her life found this easy, said, Yeah, I can. Tell me. Start at the beginning. Start with what you actually did." So I told her. We talked for 2 hours, the longest 2 hours my sister and I had spent in the same conversation since we were girls. And a few weeks later, she drove out and we sat in a diner booth, and she asked me follow-up questions, real ones, and she listened to the answers. And we were, for the first time in longer than I could remember, just 2 sisters in a booth, with no script running underneath us. Time passed, the way it does, and things rearranged themselves without ever quite announcing that they were finished. That is the part nobody tells you about a turning point. It does not tie off. You do not get a final scene with music. You just look up one day and notice the furniture of your life has been moved, quietly, into a better arrangement, and you cannot say exactly when it happened. I settled into being a general. The weight stopped feeling like a costume and started feeling like a coat that fit. The work was as absorbing as it had ever been, and it was finally fully mine, with no part of me apologizing for it or folding it into a pocket. I would catch myself in meetings doing the thing I had taught Cross to do, scanning the room for the person about to be overlooked, and I understood that I had become, at last, the officer I had needed when I was the invisible one. There is a kind of healing in becoming the thing you needed. I did not expect that. There was a young lieutenant on my new staff that autumn, a quiet one, very good at her job and completely overlooked in every meeting because she did not fight for the floor and the louder officers always took it. I watched it happen 3 or 4 times, the way her good idea would die unheard because she said it once, softly, and let it go when nobody picked it up. I knew that lieutenant. I had been that lieutenant. So one afternoon, in front of the whole staff, I stopped a meeting and I said, "The lieutenant said something 40 seconds ago, and we all rolled right past it, and it was the best idea in this room. Say it again, Lieutenant, and make us listen this time." She turned the color of a brick, and she said it again, and it was the best idea in the room, and we used it. After she came to my office, not quite knowing why, and I told her the truth. I told her I had spent 20 years being the person whose good idea died softly in a loud room, and that nobody had ever stopped a meeting for me, and that I had decided a while ago that if I ever got the chance, I would be the person who stopped the meeting. Be loud for the quiet ones, I told her. Someday you will be senior, and there will be a quiet lieutenant at your table with the best idea in the room, and you stop the meeting for her. That is what the rank is for. That is the only thing it is for. She has never been overlooked in one of my meetings since, and neither has anyone else, because the whole staff watched me do it, and learned that in my rooms, the quiet person gets heard. I am more proud of that than I am of the star. I went to my mother's house one evening that autumn, and I stopped in the hallway because the wall had changed. The one crooked frame had become many. She had filled the whole hallway. Captain, Major, Lieutenant Colonel, Colonel, the coalition posting. And in the middle, larger than the rest, a a photograph someone had taken at the ceremony. The one moment caught and printed, the whole room on its feet, and me in the center aisle with a brand new star catching the light. I put the standing up one in the middle, my mother said, coming up beside me. On purpose, so it's the first thing anybody sees when they walk in. I wanted them to see the room standing before they see anything else. She had decided, finally, for herself, what counted in her family. It had taken her 40 years, and it had taken my father being gone, and it had taken a room full of strangers standing up to give her permission she should never have needed. But she had done it. The wall was her saying it, in the only language she had left, the language of what you choose to hang where people can see. Around then, I got a letter from Captain Cross. He had rotated to a new assignment by that point, doing well, and he did not have to write me, which is exactly why the letter meant what it meant. It was short. He told me about a ceremony he had helped run at his new post, and how a woman in civilian clothes had come in near the front, unfamiliar, a little lost-looking, and how every instinct he had once had told him to manage her toward the back, and how this time he had stopped and looked twice and walked over not to remove her, but to ask if she needed help finding her seat. She had been a Gold Star mother, there to watch a memorial for the son she had lost. He had walked her to the front row himself. "I almost did the old thing, General," he wrote. "I caught it. I looked twice. I will look twice for the rest of my career. Thank you for not letting them erase me so I could be the one who didn't erase her." I want to say something about that letter, because I think it is the real ending of this story, even though it happened in the middle of it. The day that young man walked me toward the door, I had two roads in front of me. One of them was the road everyone expected me to take, the road where I let the system end him, where I let Major Frost make him disappear, where the man who embarrassed the new general got quietly erased. It would have been easy. It would even have felt like justice to some people, and it would have taught him, and everyone watching, the oldest and worst lesson the institution teaches, which is that power is for protecting itself. The other road was harder and slower, and it required me to spend time I did not have on a man who had wronged me. I took the second road, and the proof that it was the right one is a Gold Star mother in a front row seat at a memorial in a town I will never visit, seen at last, because one young officer learned to look twice. That is what the work was always for, not the star, that. I read that letter standing at my window at dusk, and I had to sit down. I had been waiting, in some buried part of myself, for the old ache to come back. You spend 40 years with a particular hunger, the hunger to be seen by the people who decided not to look, and you do not quite believe it when it goes quiet. I kept checking for it the way your tongue keeps going to the place where a tooth used to be. And standing at that window with that young man's letter in my hand, I realized I had walked into rooms all autumn without scanning them for the one person who might finally approve of me. I had just walked in. I had stopped looking for the empty seat. For the first time in my life I could remember, I walked into a room and did not search it for the face that might at last decide I was real. I just walked in and did the work and walked out. I keep waiting to feel the old ache return. I am starting to understand that it might simply not be coming back, and I almost smiled at the silence where it used to be. That was the shift, not the star, not the room standing up, the silence where the ache used to live. The last thing I want to tell you happened that winter, at a family gathering, an ordinary one, the kind I had spent 20 years being absent from. I was there. I was in the room, and my sister was introducing me to someone new, a neighbor she had brought along, and I braced, out of an old habit I had not fully unlearned, for the diminishing sentence. The office job, the acronyms nobody can follow. The do not get her started. It did not come. "This is my sister," Bridget said, and there was something in her voice I had never heard her use about me, and it took me a second to recognize it as pride. "She's a general in the United States Army. She moves whole countries' worth of help to the places that need it." I spent a long time not understanding what she did. I'm still learning it, honestly, but I'm learning, and I'm proud of her. I stood there in my mother's living room under a hallway wall full of a life finally hung where people could see it, between a sister who had learned to introduce me right, and a mother who had decided for herself what counted. and I felt the quiet glow that comes after a boundary holds, not triumph. Triumph is loud, and it is for other people. This was quieter than that. This was relief. This was a room that had finally, on its own terms and in its own time, decided to see me, and a version of me that no longer needed it to. So let me say the thing to you directly, because I think some of you have been walked quietly toward the back of a room your whole life. By people who were sure, and I want you to hear it from someone who waited too long to learn it. You do not have to wait for them to stand. The recognition you are chasing, the room rising, the people who decided who you were finally deciding again, it is a fine thing, and it may even come, but it was never the prize. The prize is the day you stop sitting down for people who were never going to rise. That is the only promotion that has ever actually mattered, and no board has to approve it, and no general has to read it off a page. You sign that order yourself. I signed mine standing in the middle of an aisle with a stranger's hand falling off my elbow and a whole room getting to its feet. And I will tell you the truth. The room was beautiful, but the order I signed for myself that day is the thing I actually kept. I waited a very long time to learn that. You do not have to wait as long as I did. Look twice at yourself, the way I taught that young captain to look twice at the room. You might find the principle everyone walked past was you, the whole time. If you've ever poured your whole life into work the people closest to you refuse to see, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Would you have let that young captain walk you out without a word, the way I did? Or would you have stopped him right there in the aisle? And do you think my sister really changed, or just finally ran out of room to stand on? Tell me. I read every comment. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while. There is a seat up front for you here.